Hey, Tony, thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here today. Really appreciate it.
So I'm excited to dig into all kinds of business topics on business growth and long-term success and really resilience. That's something you talk a lot about, and I think that's just a huge fundamental for business. So tell people a little bit about why that's such a big thing for you, why resilience is kind of one of those top points that you focus on.
Yeah, I really think this is kind of my life mission, honestly. So I grew up in small business. My parents had a small Italian bakery, fantastic bakers. Unfortunately, didn't know what they didn't know about growing a business. And so at the age of 12, we lost everything. We lost the house, the car, and even my dog. And so it was a real challenging time. And so that kind of set the journey for me from that very kind of moldable age. And so here I am later, I go to college, I study entrepreneurship to really kind of redeem the past. So I started another bakery, this time an online bakery. And so what we did was we were able to take cakes, came up with the technology to mail them anywhere in the country with a photo on it and have it arrive perfectly. And so because of that, we won Best New Product at the New York Incentive Show and ended up landing great clients. Like we mailed cakes to Jennifer Lopez, to Jay-Z. We did cakes for Sony and Microsoft, all these huge companies. And I thought, you know, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm thinking, man, I got this down. Entrepreneurship is easy. And then I found out I didn't know what I didn't know. And so that business also failed. But at this point, I'm a little bit older. I find myself with a wife, baby on the way. I'm saying, you know, this is not a good situation. I got to learn how to be successful. Like who actually knows how to run a business? Because clearly I didn't learn what I needed to learn from college. You know, it was great. I learned a lot of great things, but not everything I needed to know. And so that's when I started on my 10-year journey to work with the best companies in the world. Companies like Ford, like ADP, like Google, companies like that. And then 10 years later, I left, went back to kind of my first love, which is entrepreneurship, started a marketing agency to help folks in that area. And then I noticed a lot of businesses were struggling with their strategy and their planning. And so 2 years ago, I started a second company to focus on coaching and consulting and training.
So I'm curious, because you said that business failed, but you didn't say why. I'm curious why it failed. What were some of those problems that you didn't know then that you know now that didn't allow that business to be sustainable, that didn't allow it to last? What were some of those issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had everything going for us. We had PR, we had SEO, we came up on the top of Google for, you know, corporate gifts and birthday cakes. You know, everything looked great on paper, except we didn't understand the fundamentals of profitability. I find this companies all the time. And so we had very narrow margin for profit. And as the shipping costs went up, because it was very dependent on a number of things, packaging, dry ice, UPS and FedEx, as those costs went up, there was no margin and our cost per acquisition just didn't match the profitability. And so ultimately that business failed and we just didn't have the sustainability to go anywhere with it.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think this is a really big deal. You know, I see this all the time, and shoot, I've run into this before myself, even after years in business, unfortunately, where there's enough money, there's money coming in, and you're thinking, wow, like we've sold this thing and we sold that thing and there's this money coming in. Yeah. And it's so easy to not realize at the end of the day what that like net profit is. What's the bottom line after all that money goes out? And I think especially if you're, you know, really in any role in the company, it's amazing to see sometimes companies that are producing hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars sometimes, but not actually making any money at the end of the day because it all gets spent. So talk about like some of those lessons in profitability like that you learned that you're now helping teach other people.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I literally had a call with a venture capitalist just yesterday, and he's on the board of a $200 million marketing agency and that wants to sell, and they can't sell because they're not worth anything because it's all revenue, no profit. And so that's particularly hard in an area like ours with marketing agencies to not get commoditized and not kind of lose your shirt. And so what you always want to take into account is what is the profitability of the company, number one. And number two, especially in these days, what is your cash flow? So when's the money coming in? When is it going out? And those are really the main drivers. And the profitability comes down to really your costs. I mean, and the cost to fulfill it, to market, all these things have to be taken into account. And you ask yourself, why are these companies like Apple, like Google, like Amazon worth so much? Because they're not so much, work, you're exchanging labor for money. They have a lot more leverage. They're software companies, they're data companies. And that's where so much value is, because if you're exchanging your time for money, it's a very dangerous situation, in any business. But, in terms of selling it and growing it, you want to take all that into account, and you want to have at least a 10% kind of net profit at the end of the year, because then you can grow from that. I mean, a great book that kind of I learned a lot from was Michael Michalowicz's Profit First. Great book that talks about all those concepts. I won't go into detail on that. You can have him on the show, but that is a great book on that topic.
I'd love to have Mike on the show. Actually, he's a super smart guy. I love the work that he does. Actually, I just read one of his newer books called Clockwork, which came out after Profit First, and it inspired me to take 30 days off this year, which I'd planned prior to the pandemic, but I ended up pulling it off anyway. And I think those ideas in Profit First and in Clockwork are just spectacular for businesses. But thinking about that idea of, you have to have this bottom line number after all the money is spent, not just for yourself, especially if you're a small business, not just for yourself to put in your own bank account for you to do whatever you want to do that's fun or interesting or to take care of your own life, but the business itself needs to have money left over at the end of the day. Number one, for savings. I mean, I really learned that this year. Yes. I think in the midst of this whole pandemic, I think we all, even me included, thought, you know what, I probably need a little more cash in the bank than I thought that I did. All my even my recurring revenue that we have plenty of is only as good as the clients that are able to pay it. Right. So if they stop being able to pay it, you stop getting money, and now what are you going to do? Yeah. And so that stuff's crazy. I noticed in your kind of manifesto, Small Steps to Grow Profits, one of the things you said was you must slow down to speed up. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so this is a lesson I learned back actually before all this. I was a professional violinist. And so what I learned from my teacher, when I was in conservatory, I was going at the same time I was getting my business degree. I was, I always wanted to get to the good stuff, the melody, kind of skip over the hard notes and just kind of blow right through it. And I learned from him this lesson to slow down to speed up, because, you got to take each note, learn it, speed up, and then you can ultimately play the piece well. Same principle applies to business. So many of us rush ahead without first putting into place a plan, a strategy. And that really hurts us, because if you think about it, how many times have we hired the wrong person? How many times have we wasted money in advertising? How many times have we went in the wrong direction, wasted time, effort, and money? And that a lot of times it's because we just didn't take time to plan and think about it and really chart our course before we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all those areas are a big deal, especially I think about hiring. And I remember I was up in Nashville, Dave Ramsey's organization, one time he was teaching a lesson on hiring, and he said, one of the big things that they believe is like hire slow, fire slower, which is kind of opposite of what some people say, which is like hire fast, fire fast, or hire slow, fire fast, or whatever. And the idea was if you really take the time to hire, he's like, how much time you think you're spending right now, you probably should multiply it times 4. And that's how much time you should actually spend to hire the right person. Absolutely. Because otherwise you get the wrong person, and it takes a lot more cost and energy for that person to then be removed and replaced with somebody else. And it's not in anybody's interest at that point. It's not in your interest as a leader. It's not in the company's interest. And it's not in the person's interest who is not a good fit for the role either. Everybody has their best gifts, talents, and abilities, and everybody belongs somewhere, but it might not be at your company. And that's really important to consider as well.
Oh yeah, I learned that lesson a long time ago. Unfortunately, I've made the mistake even after, because sometimes you get anxious, don't slow down, and I sped up. But it's really critical that you look at their values. Do their values align with your company? Do they have the behaviors necessary? Do they have the personality type? And then the skills. Most people just start with the skills, and then they leave the other parts out, and that usually is a mismatch, and that doesn't work well either. So it's really just kind of looking at what you want. I know this this is kind of go off topic from an HR perspective, but just I've had that experience so many times.
Sure.
I wanted to share that. But either way, you want to have a plan. So what is that person going to do? How's it going to fit in your organization? All that has to be worked out in advance.
Absolutely. And so tell me a little bit about this idea of building resistance through crisis. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I think if there's if there's been any time that we need to figure that out, it's been this year. And the hard reality is it's hard to figure that out in the midst of crisis. And I think what we've all learned is that we need to be prepared for things that we don't know are coming, you know?
Yeah.
And so what are some ways that people can prepare for crisis ahead of time and not just manage the crisis while they're in the midst of it? And we can talk about both things, but because they are a little bit different. One is preparing for the unknown, and then the other is really dealing with it once it's there. And I think you deal with a lot of that. So talk me through a little bit of that and kind of where your head is there.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest lessons I learned was from my mother. She's really been my inspiration on how to get through adversity. And so this is one of the stories I tell in the manifesto, as a matter of fact. But she grew up during a time very similar to what we're experiencing today. So in the late 1930s, there was a polio epidemic. And so unfortunately, at the age of 9 months old, she contracted polio, wasn't able to walk, wasn't able to participate in sports or even hug her mother or father, see her sisters. You know, she was quarantined. Back then they had iron lungs, which are basically the ventilators that we have today. And so I remember growing up, even before the pandemic, asking her, you know, how do you weather that? Like, how do you have the mindset to go from 9 all the way up to, you know, 14, you know, and ultimately accomplish your vision, which for her was really just to have a normal life. To her, that meant wearing high heels. Like, how do you do that? And really what I learned was you have to break things down. Very similar to slow down to speed up, but it's a different concept in the sense that to have success, you have to know what to do, how to do it, and then take action. Those are really the three components. And for her, you know, growing up in the hospital, they started off with her moving her doing pottery to get some strength and build the nervous system. That was kind of the what, because they had a vision for her as well, for her to be able to walk. And so they would take that, and then the next step would be, okay, go in a pool, get more strength, to the point where you're finally taking walks and taking what I call small steps. That's the name of my book. And that's the name of the manifesto, because it's about taking the small steps. And so this can be applied either before a crisis or during a crisis or even after, because it's the same concepts. And it's really, okay, what do I want to accomplish? How am I going to accomplish it? And then actually doing it. And so, you know, whether you're trying to, this is for life or business, whether you're trying to lose weight, you know, what is my goal weight? How am I going to do it? And then actually doing it. And a lot of times in business or in life, we fall down in one of those areas. Yeah, I want to lose weight. I know what to do. I think everybody knows what to do. And most of us probably know how to do it, but they don't take action. A lot of times in business though, you know, they go right to number 2. I want to know how to do SEO. I want to know how to do Facebook. Okay, well, why do you want to do that? What's the reason why? What do you want to accomplish? So really going through that framework, no matter what the situation you're in, either you want to grow, you want to scale, or you want to kind of resurrect yourself from a crisis. That's a framework that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the things I've been telling people a lot is, you know, back in the day, people used to come to me and they would say, hey, Jay, we want to build a website. Or they'd come to me and say, hey, Jay, we need to do some SEO. And whatever they said they wanted was just like, all right, well, we'll do that thing. And here's how much it costs. And we'd come to an agreement and we'd do the thing, whatever they asked. Yeah. And now they come to us and they say, hey, Jay, I need to build a website. They ask the exact same question. I need to do some SEO. And the question I ask is, well, why do you need to do that?
Yeah.
And they go, well, we have to have a website because everybody has a website. Well, why do you need that? Well, we need people to know about us. Well, why do you need that? And it gets a little bit ridiculous when you start to do that. But at the same time, it has to get to the root question of what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day.
Right.
And usually it's to get attention and acquire customers.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so then the question becomes, all right, well, is that the first and best vehicle for you to do that with? I agree, you probably need a website, and ranking well on Google probably does matter. It matters for most people in most industries, but that might not be where you need to start. Right. And that's one thing we talk about a lot, you know, is like you got to have a good plan up front.
Yeah.
And so back in the day, we would just do whatever people told us to do. And
Right.
now it's a lot different. Now we go, hold on, let's make sure we have a good plan in place.
Right.
Let's talk about the strategy. Let's make sure we have a blueprint, because you wouldn't just go start building a building without having an architect draw up a blueprint. You shouldn't do marketing or business growth or launch a new product or anything else without some level of that type of planning as well.
Absolutely. No, that's 100% correct. And that's why I found as well, it really comes down to your priorities. So yes, you can do everything, but to have success, you want to prioritize. And so where are you going to put your time, where are you going to put your effort, and where you put your money? That's, where you want to kind of analyze it and say, okay, yes, I could do SEO, I could do Facebook, I could do anything. What's the number one priority? What's the number two priority, et cetera?
Well, I think especially as it relates to marketing, but this is just business growth as a whole, is it seems like it should be easier than ever to get attention and acquire customers. But in fact, I actually believe it's harder than it's ever been,
Yeah.
because there's so many avenues to consider. And so what happens is people tend to dabble in all of these things. And then they go, well, that didn't work. We tried Facebook ads, or we tried this, or we tried that. And I'm like, yeah, but if you were to put a backhoe in my backyard and I were to go try and dig a pool with it, it would not go very well. Not because the backhoe is the wrong tool, but because I don't know how to drive a backhoe and I had no plan on how to do it. Now, if you hire somebody who knows how to do that, they're going to go back there, get on the backhoe, dig the hole, and all the other things that go along with the pool, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But that's so true in so much of business, and having that right plan in place. And I love the way you put it, and you have it in that manifesto, that time, effort, and money. You got to decide how much of each one of those things to give away. And I always tell people too, I'm like, look, when you lose all your money, there's been plenty of people who've lost all their money, gone completely bankrupt, and then resurrected and been a multimillionaire within a few years later. That's what's crazy about, the opportunities we have in the world that we get to live in. But time, you give up time, you don't get any more of it. No. You can't buy any more of it. No matter how rich you are, it just goes away. Yeah. And so knowing where that goes is really important to me. What have you learned over time, speaking of time, about where you spend your time? Because I'm sure that's changed a lot over the past 10 years. So how do you decide what to prioritize for yourself as a leader? How do you decide where your time is best focused?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I try to work, like I've heard this so many times, and everyone else probably has too, but working more on the business as opposed to in the business. So I try to use as much leverage as possible. So leverage comes in many ways. It could be by having employees. It could be having outsources. It could be through automation. It could be through building software, things like that can scale and not have me reliant. So I'm not the cog in the system is a very helpful thing. And then the other component is really my framework called the results loop. That's kind of the so I talked about, you need small steps of what, how, all the different components, the what, the why, the how, all the things, but really how do you make that tangible? That's why I created the results loop, to make it easy to plan, because most people don't have the time, they don't have the money, they don't want to hire somebody to do this. They just want to make it easy. So I created my own framework based on working with some of the best companies in the world. What are the 6 factors that really drove their growth? And so whenever I'm going into a new initiative, analyzing where my business is today, I put it through this very simple framework, which looks at the markets you're serving, the products and services you're providing them, your value proposition for each one of those segments, how you're going to grow the number of new buyers, how do you increase the size of those buyers, and finally, how do you drive loyalty for those buyers? So everything I do, whether I'm pivoting or I'm trying to grow something, I always put it through that mental framework.
I love that idea. And anybody who is just listening to this and doesn't get the benefit of this, but if you go look at the video on Facebook or if you check out the YouTube video, actually right behind Tony is an illustration of that results loop. So you can kind of get a glimpse at that. And so there's kind of for those of you that are visual learners, a little bit more like me, to kind of see what he means about that. And so as you develop that framework, I think this is interesting because I see this a lot with, and I'm literally working on my own kind of version of a framework. It's not actually related to that in the same way, but it's about business growth in the long term. And I see a lot of that happen. People kind of go, you know what, I've got this system. So how did you develop that? Like what time and effort did it take for you to go, hey, these are the 6 things, and these are how they connect, and this is how people need to fill this out? Because that takes a lot of work to get that right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've been working on this for close to a decade. Sadly, I thought it would be a lot faster, and it really came through my business by working with clients. So I had a marketing agency, and a lot of times I'd be frustrated because I couldn't get the results that I wanted to, or that the client wanted at least for their campaigns. And I kept on thinking about why is the case. And many of the times is these, especially small ones, they weren't marketing ready, meaning they didn't know their market. They didn't really, some of them haven't even defined their products and services.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's like, I mean, I was so used to working with great companies that I honestly took it for granted. So, I mean, when you work to ADP, they have everything down to the, to the penny and to the, teams. And when I go to work with these little companies, they don't have anything. And I
Yeah.
said, okay, well, how do I fill that gap? And so it was really a lot of time reflecting, okay, what are these great companies doing, and what are the small ones that aren't successful not doing? And really it came down to strategic planning. And so that's why I said, I got to make a way to make strategic planning. And so I actually backed into this. My
Mm.
original vision for this was to create software. So there's a software component to this that I started first. I wasn't getting traction with the software because people just weren't understanding it. So I said, okay, I got to go back and really make it so simple you can do it on a single sheet of paper. So I
Yeah.
kind of distilled everything down and made it really simple. I'm very visual, so I draw a lot, whiteboard a lot, and that was kind of how I kept on iterating on it. But everything in this has a purpose, even the infinity sign, because it's recursive. All this you go back to again and again, which ironically is the same motion as a bow for a violin. It's like
Mm.
that kind of was inspired there too. But yeah, it's really kind of looking at it and say, okay, what are the core things that really, really matter, and getting rid of all the other junk and just focusing on these 6, and that's it. So it's just a really time of eliminating, kind of like carving a statue, just kind of taking more and more off of it until I got to just the essence of what growth is.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you think about it, those big companies do have those things ironed out.
Yeah.
And a lot of small businesses, I would say most small businesses do
Yeah.
not.
No.
I didn't for years. I have not had these things figured out for a longer period of time than I have had them figured out. Let me put it that way. I've been in business 21 years,
Yeah.
and it's probably really been the last, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 years that I've really started to get this stuff ironed out in a way that is duplicatable, and that I'm not like you said, I'm not the primary cog in the wheel. But the other thing I want to encourage people with that are listening or watching is remember that most of the big businesses that are mega businesses today in our lifetime started in somebody's garage.
Yeah.
And they did not have systems and processes and teams and organizational charts and results loops and everything else when they started. I mean, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple literally in a garage.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon and owns Amazon, in the most crappy little apartment, office that you could ever imagine. And now those companies are worth more than any companies have ever been worth ever, in my lifetime. And that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But they've done that by going, hey, how can we beat ourselves? Because I think that's what's key about, and this is a little bit of a side tangent, but I'm just thinking about companies that implement things like this. It's not always about beating somebody else. I think that's what's so interesting about a company like Apple to me is I don't think they really care what Samsung is doing or Google or anybody else. All they care about is beating themselves from last year. I really believe that's how they think.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they're so successful.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of make their own path. So, and that actually almost goes back to point number 3 of the growth factors, which is value. So what's your value? And that value so much comes down to what makes you unique, because value is not as valuable if it's unique. It becomes a commodity. So if you're the only one that has this particular thing, then it's much more valuable. And so that's where Google takes into account, having the best search engine, being unique in its, the way it markets itself. Everything is unique. Apple, very unique, right? So innovation, all that comes from that idea of kind of, like you said, raising the stakes, but not just to compete against others, to make your own levels.
I noticed one of the big phrases that you use in a lot of your own marketing on your website and other materials is it says, together we can democratize marketing.
Yeah.
Talk about what you mean by that and how it can have an impact on people's lives.
Yeah. So it's funny. It almost hits on what you were saying earlier before about how difficult it is to market sometimes. And so what I where I start with this is usually with the what I call the marketing revolution. And so years ago, very simple. You take an ad, you put it in a newspaper, boom, you get some business. Not even that long ago. Gosh, when I had my first business, the cake business, I used to run newspaper ads and get results. So this is not that long ago.
Yeah.
Uh, but then you had broadcast, right? You had radio, TV, gets more and more, complicated. Then all of a sudden you have search, you have Google, you had a directory before that called Yahoo, more and more busy, more and more fragmented to the point you get social, people are creating their own content. And today you're competing for attention. You're competing against Netflix. You're competing against YouTube. You're not even competing against your competitors, because you're competing for attention nowadays. And so really, if you boil that all down, there's three primary problems with that. Problem number one is that there's fragmentation. So now this goes back to the prioritization. There's so many places you could be. There's thousands of channels, right? Just on TV, there's thousands of channels. But from a marketer's perspective, a channel would be, social media versus, broadcast, etc. Within each of those, there's thousands of options. So where is the absolute best place to invest your time, effort, and money? That's problem number one is the fragmentation. Once you get through that hurdle, there's still a ton of competition there, especially for attention. That's clutter. So how do you break through with your message and your value and really stand out? And then if you can get through those first few hurdles, the third one is technology. So now you got to know pixels, you got to know, code, you got to know all this stuff. That makes it very, very hard for even the best companies. I remember I was at a CMO forum, 10 years ago at Harvard University with like major players. Some of the biggest companies in the world had their CMOs at this event. They didn't have this down either. So it's like, they were very nervous, especially because they're behind in technology. They skewed a little older. They don't know all the technology. They're nervous. How much worse is it for the small business? So my whole mission is to democratize marketing because, the big companies, they can get the resources. Small businesses don't have it. So the idea here is to provide the strategies, tools, and tactics that the best companies have to small businesses at a very affordable price.
I love that. I think it's really important because the vast majority of businesses are small businesses. And a lot of people listening to this show are small business. In fact, the SBA actually qualifies as small business as anybody under 500 employees, which if you got 500 employees, I'm not sure I would call you a small business anymore, sure. But that is the official verbiage on that, which is pretty wild. I just love this stuff. I think it has a big impact on people to be thinking about these things before they need them. And some people are in the midst of this right now going, gosh, I'm struggling with all this stuff in the midst of all the crisis that we're going on in right now. So talk to that person who maybe hasn't prepared well, but they're in the midst of where we are, and wherever. I'm not even sure where we are. I think that's part of the problem. We're still in this kind of like fog of a pandemic, and everybody thinks it's in a different place, and there's all this political drama, and there's just it's such a mess. But we as business owners and entrepreneurs have a responsibility to focus on what our priority is. I cannot produce a vaccine. I cannot change the political dialogue. What I can do is wake up every day and focus on things that I need to focus on. So what would you say to people right now who are trying to manage crisis in their business today, and it's not something they can plan for 3 years from now?
Right. Yeah, it's a very difficult time. I hear this all the time too, but it's so true. You're not alone. Like all of us are in the same boat, or at least we're in the same storm. We may not be in the same boat. I might rather be in Jeff Bezos's boat than mine, but the reality is we're all facing challenges. And so what do you do? So this is where so many times you have to make decisions, and where you are today and where you're going to be in the future are really the result of the decisions you've make. Like it or not. I mean, some of us, there's life chances, if you're born in the middle of a very poor village in Africa, there's only so many things you can do. The deck is really stacked against you. But for most people that are in the United States that are watching this, we have so much advantage. And so the question is, what do we do? Like, how do we make decisions that set us up for the future? And I love that quote from Wayne Gretzky. You want to skate to where the puck is going, right? You want to prepare to where it's going. And even today, though, you want to make sure you're viable today. And so this is where many times you have to make a decision. If I'm viable today, Let's stay the course. Let's see how we can continue to grow. If you're not viable today, meaning you're losing your shirt, what do? This is where adapting and pivoting is important. And so just as an example, as we talked about before, I got into training consulting, but I still have my marketing agency, and that marketing agency revenue tanked. I mean, like 90%, because we had a lot of, clients in events and health or events and weddings and areas like that. So what do? So I honestly put myself through my own framework. I say, okay, what areas are doing really well? Like, what's the markets that are doing well? And I came up with 2. Seems like nowadays everybody's on Zoom, right? And so I created a whole area for our agency to focus on podcasting, which I'm here now on podcasts, and also virtual summits. So we shifted to building more tools and helping with consulting for those areas because they're a growth area. And I'm a big believer that there's always money available. It's just not always in the same place. It's flowing somewhere else. So how do you take advantage of that? And one of the things I learned growing up through all my business experience is it's way easier to ride a wave as opposed to creating your own wave. And so when I got Google's 2009 Agency of the Year award, I got that because I rode the wave of Google AdWords. Before that, I rode the wave of SEO. After that, I rode the wave of social media. So it's always looking at, okay, what's the next wave coming in? How do I ride that? Because that's the surest way to be growing, because you don't have to be great at business. You're going to grow just by the fact that the industry is growing. So you're going to have automatic growth. If you're great at business, you're going to grow that much more, but it's the best thing you can do is find where the market's going and then get ahead of that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's the kind of picture of the true entrepreneur as well. This thing hit me, I can't control it. Now what am I going to do? And I think there's been a season of that in a lot of people, and you get to find out, what kind of entrepreneurial gusto and leadership gusto you've got in a season like this. And doesn't mean you can't have a moment to grieve. But if there's people depending on you, you got to keep moving and you got to find the next thing that's going to push things forward. And I love that. I love seeing, for lack of a better term, like sprouts popping up in a forest that's been, cut down. Yeah. And that's what's happening right now is you're seeing sprouts grow up in a forest that's been cut down. So that's really encouraging. Tony, as you think about, everybody in this current situation, you think about really zooming out, not even in this crisis today, but long-term, about building a business that lasts. What kind of parting thoughts or advice would you give to people to help them build a business that lasts without being worn out and stressed out and ready to quit?
Well, one of the easiest things to do, and I always encourage this, I learned this later on, I wish I did this earlier, but the value of getting coaching, mentorship, I surround myself with people that are already where I want to be in every level, spiritually, financially. Surround yourself with people, but get, mentored by them if you can. So I'm very diligent to have at least 2 or 3 mentors at a time, in different facets of my life, so I can kind of get held accountable. That's a really big lesson. And the other thing to do is have a model. So kind of similar, but even my results loop, one of the reasons I created the results loop is so you can model others. So then that's where the software came in that I mentioned before. So imagine if someone else in the industry filled out their results loop, you could model what they're doing. Or someone in a completely different industry, you can get, kind of growth ideas. So say I'm a dentist and I have a hard time with my show ratio. Well, maybe I could look into a car dealerships because they're really good at that. And so you can always kind of cross-pollinate. So, but the point is, find someone that's where you want to be, model what they're doing, which is a Tony Robbins quote, and you're most likely get there as well. And the success does not have to be a mystery. Find the people that are doing it and call them. I'm doing a virtual summit. Like I mentioned before, right now, I'm calling out people in my network that have experience in events. I'm not like trying to create this on my own. I'm asking people, and most people are willing to help. Just pick up the phone and call them.
Yeah, I think that's really good counsel. There's no reason for you to, people often say it's lonely at the top, but I always say it doesn't have to be.
No.
And you get to decide who you surround yourself with. And we all know this is not, anything you or I have invented, but the people that are around us will dictate who we become.
Yeah.
And so who are you surrounding yourself with? I think that's really good counsel. Tony, it's been really a pleasure to talk with you today. Where can people find more about you online and maybe more about either your manifesto or your results loop? What's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so I have examples of the results loop, templates, the whole bit, absolutely free. You can go to the website smallstepsmanifesto.com. You can download the manifesto, and within that is the links to all the resources and the stories I talked about here. And then if anyone wants to connect with me directly, I'm always willing to help. So go to meg.com. At the bottom, you can scroll down, go to my LinkedIn profile, connect with me, and we can chat.
Awesome. Tony, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.